folks, so now that we're finally on the trolley, good afternoon. Welcome to this little trolley tour that we're going to get into here. The point of this tour is to really show you what the footprint of the Empire State Plaza looks like. We're going to go all the way around. We're going to go back by the Executive Mansion. We're going to take a look at the back end of the Empire State Plaza, and we'll eventually get some wheels right up onto the plaza itself. So I think that'll be pretty cool. I got to talk about the art somehow, right? But before we do take off, I do want to fill you in a very brief history of the Empire State Plaza here. It is not named after Nelson Rockefeller for no reason. This was sort of his brainchild when he becomes a governor in the 1960s. This is what he wants to do. He wants to create something for not only the people that work here in New York State and in Albany. Beforehand, it was a bunch of various little office buildings that were scattered all around the city, and now he decides he wants to put everything in one center. And thus, the Empire State Plaza is born. It doesn't get named after him until the project itself was completed. He actually never wanted his name attached to the Plaza project directly, but other political machinations took place and it got named after him anyway. He simply wanted to call this the South Mall. Now, the initial construction begins in 1965, and that lasts us all the way to 1978. The final building that's constructed on the plaza is the Egg, that big cylindrical-looking building. I will talk about that in a bit more detail once we actually get a little bit closer to that. Rockefeller himself was a bit of a frustrated architect, you might say. He very much wanted to design buildings. He wanted to be an artist, but he ended up being governor of New York State instead. But when he works on the plaza, him and his family friend, Wallace K. Harrison, who is not a family friend after the project is done, but that's a little bit further on down the line, they work together to construct a very modern, a very new style of architecture here in the 1960s that some people term brutalism. Because you see the brutal edges, you see the guts of the building on the outside. It's not just a bunch of marble, you also might see how a building can function. It's a pretty neat style of architecture. Again, I'll get a little bit more into that a little bit later on this tour. In the end, the Empire State Plaza will take up about 98.5 acres of land, and it will fully cost New York State $1.7 billion to complete. This is one of the largest urban redevelopment projects that took place in New York State, and it's also one of those urban redevelopment projects from the 1960s that actually stuck the landing, and we still use it for all of our businesses today. So the first thing that I really want to talk about on this tour is some of the memorials that you will see here on this tour. Looking out just to your right is the World War II Memorial. The World War II Memorial was put up very early on. It was made by the architect and deputy commissioner for OGS's design and construction team by the name of William F. O'Connor III. The memorial itself has actually two sides to it. On the one hand, you have the Western Front, and then you have the Pacific Theater of the Second World War. In the center would be a brass eagle that was cast in New York State. It was actually cast in a foundry in the city of Talix. And all of the battles that New Yorkers fought in, which was basically every single one of them since New York entered the war in 1942, all the way around the edges of it, with quotes by General Douglas MacArthur as well as General Eisenhower. In the back, you will notice service flags of all the branches that participated in the Second World War. Space Force wasn't a thing yet, so we don't have their service flag up there. And you might also notice, if you walk on by it a little bit later, or when we drove by it, you notice the fountains that are churning the water. This World War II Memorial is not a place that you're meant to quietly reflect on the sacrifices that these soldiers made. It's not a place to necessarily think. It is to demonstrate the turbulence of the time in the Second World War that caused for the people and the citizens of the world. About 1.7 million New Yorkers will end up serving in the Second World War, with about 61,000 of them wounded. Alright folks, so due to a bit of a road construction that's blocking our way, we are going to have to take a slight little detour. So what we're not going to be able to see on this tour, but it's something you might be able to see a little bit later on, is the Executive Mansion. The Executive Mansion is a place where almost every single New York State governor that has ever served us in the state took residence, from our 33rd governor, Samuel Tilden. we're now going to actually get to see something that not a lot of even residents of Albany might get the chance of seeing, and that's actually the back end of the plaza. 17 million objects that are in our collection. The New York State Library today is one of the top 20 largest libraries in the world. I bet you didn't think the Library of Alexandria was here on the East Coast. Either way, it's now in there. So on the New York State Museum today, you will see what I would call the natural history of New York State. If you're looking to see the tales of the Revolution or what happened in the 1860s during the American Civil War, this is not the museum for you. But it will tell you about the logging industry that took place here in the Adirondack Mountains. It will show you the gems and stones that people have found out here. It will talk about Beverwyck, the original Dutch settlement that eventually gets renamed to Albany. You'll also be able to see the Cohoes Mastodon, as well as a beautiful exhibit about 9/11 that was put up essentially, hours and days after the attack took place. It's definitely a place worth checking out if you haven't quite yet. The other building is called Corning Tower, but you'll have to hear about that a little bit later on in this story. So now I'm getting a chance to talk about some of the other memorials that are here on the plaza. There's actually a bit of greenage that you might see here, one of the rare opportunities that it pokes its head out. In this memorial garden, you will see exhibits to the Korean War. You will see a Women's Veterans Memorial as well as a Purple Heart Memorial. However, there's not much point talking about those in any detail because we can't see them from the road. But the one that we can see from the road is not a memorial. It is a remembrance. That big structure that you see just over there on the right. Of our remembrance, there is an ever-burning flame. The biggest difference between a memorial and a remembrance is that these people are only missing, and we hope they are not quite yet departed from us. That is why at the very top, there is an ever-burning flame, which is quite literally a beacon to guide our missing people home to us. Now, as we drive on by this big old building over here, it's probably worth mentioning. This is definitionally the second largest building on the Empire State Plaza, the first being the plaza itself. This is our Swan Street building. Now, the reason why it ends up needing to be so long is when this was designed in the 1960s, it is originally intended to be the DMV building for New York, which meant that this would need to store records of every single New Yorker that lives here in the state in some physical capacity. But by the time this building finishes in 1975, we have computers and we don't need to have as much paper documentation anymore. And so the amount of space that we needed for the DMV shrank substantially, and we used the extra office space to have other agencies of New York State operating out of this building. So it ends up becoming a major hub for state workers here at the Plaza. You also notice on your right, in just a few minutes, on the very corner of the Swan Street building, you will see the cornerstone of the Empire State Plaza, but you will notice something. It says South Mall, like I called it earlier. Nelson Rockefeller actually intended a northern mall to be constructed on the north end of Albany. However, whatever, the funding ran out or his political influence died out, and either way, the North Mall never got constructed, but the South Mall name still stuck here. This other white building that you see on your right is also one of the more critical buildings on the plaza. This is the Legislative Office Building. Now, in New York State, we do not have enough space in the Capitol building for every single senator, legislator, and their staff members. And so we built a whole building for them instead. The Legislative Office Building has enough space for the 150 assembly members and 63 senators all to have a 2-office suite that allows them to operate outside of their home district, wherever it might be, or trying to find an open spot in the Capitol. So if you've ever called up your New York State legislator, you probably got their number right here to this building. Now, speaking of the Capitol building, that's what we're passing by here on our left. Now, I will not be talking about the Capitol so much here on this tour. We have a whole nother tour designed for that, so you better try and catch that one just after this tour. The Capitol building was initially constructed in 1867, and its construction lasts all the way to 1899, and it ends up costing New York State approximately $25 million in 1899 to fully construct, being one of the most expensive buildings that was constructed in the 19th century. Now, going back on your right, this is the Justice Building, the Abrams Justice Building. This is a main hub for smaller courts, legal documents. It's not the Court of Appeals building, which is the Supreme Court for New York State, which is next to Albany City Hall, but this is more for lower courts. And you'll also notice one of the earlier memorials on our plaza, which is the Vietnam War Memorial. Inside, you'll find 4 bronze plates with the names of all the New Yorkers who passed away in line of service in Vietnam. And on the inside, you will find the Vietnam War Gallery, which usually has a rotating exhibit. We are currently pulling the one that's in and out, and we'll be replacing it with a battlefield medicine exhibit. Now to swivel your heads once again back over here to your left side. This is West Capitol Park. This is the technical front entrance of the Capitol building. You might notice the fencing around the stairs, however, because the stairs aren't doing so well. We're repairing those as we speak. But you will notice the only equestrian statue in the city of Albany. That is of General Sheridan, as he was a resident here several years when he was very young. It's also a bit of an interesting history with that statue. It was initially slated to go down to Washington, D.C. to be set up with all the other generals that fought for the Union Army during the Civil War. However, the board that designed the statue, his wife was on this council, and she believed that he looked too fat in that casting. And so that didn't get sent down to Washington, D.C., and it got sent here to Albany instead. Now, while we pass by this underpass, and there really isn't too much for me to discuss, I do want to tell you a little bit more about the architecture style, that brutalist style. Nelson Rockefeller was very much a man of his times, and that was a very modern man. Nelson Rockefeller and his mother were on the board of the Museum of Modern Art down in New York City. He had extreme dyslexia, which prevented him from even being able to recognize shapes that easily. And so that is why he tended to go towards the modern, with its more abstract style, with its more sharper images. He was inspired by Tibetan monasteries, things that were built into the hill in tiers and layers like fortresses, which you will notice looking out this window. You kind of get that city on a hill type of idea. And that's what he's trying to design with this plaza. Because don't forget, he is trying to make a beacon in the middle of New York State for people to remember that Albany is the capital. And what's a better way to do that than to design a monastery and a fortress right in the heart of your city? Alright, so although we are approaching where we picked you up for this tour, you might notice we are coming from the opposite direction. This tour's got a little bit left. As I mentioned, we want to take some wheels up on the Empire State Plaza itself, where I will discuss the art collection that we have here. Now, the Empire State Plaza art collection is actually the largest collection of modern art in the world that's available to the public free of charge. This collection has about 96 pieces in its collection from various sculptures and paintings. Some of these come from us, such as famous people such as Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Francois Stali. All were chosen by a board of art critics that Rockefeller himself picked. They would choose artists that they believed would stand the test of time, would be the best representatives of this abstract expressionist art style that was starting to blossom in the 1950s and 60s. The abstract expressionism at the time was also referred to as the New York School of Art, as all of these artists came directly from New York City. So the first piece of art that we're going to talk about here on this tour is this big yellow sculpture that we have right next to us. This piece of art was made by George Sugarman. It is a naval trio, and it was made in 1971. Now, George Sugarman was a seed form of concept of art style. What he really wanted you to do is to experience this piece of art from any side of the sculpture. From being out here on the street, to looking at from the front facing down, right down its gullet. He even wanted you to step inside the piece of art and view it like it's a tunnel from the inside. That's going to be something you will notice about all this abstract expressionism art on this tour, is that a lot of these sculptures were not designed to be, noticeable symbols. They were designed to be shapes to be experienced. So we very much encourage you to step inside of our piece of art, take a look at it from the inside, and just please don't actually step on the piece of art. But what's unique about this Sugarman is that it actually just came back from generational treatment. A lot of our sculptures and art pieces do frequently go out for conservation, being a public art collection. This does mean they do take some more damage than an art collection behind glass than a museum would take. So generational treatment refers to the idea that the treatment that we've applied on this should mean we don't need to send it away for another generation. And that's what we're doing with all the various art pieces in our collection. Alright, so while we have a good view of it, I think it's time to talk about Corning Tower. Corning Tower is named after Mayor Erasmus Corning, who was Albany's mayor from 1942 to 1983. He will serve us for 43 years here in the city. He is not only Albany's longest serving mayor, he is actually the longest serving mayor in American history. But initially, Erasmus Corning was not a big fan of the Empire State Plaza. He thought it was a waste of New York resources to spend it on this urban redevelopment project, believing it to be a vanity project for the governor at the time. However, he eventually came around when he came up with a unique funding plan that would actually have New York borrow money from the city of Albany, as opposed to using its own tax dollars, slowly paying back the debt to the city. We eventually owned the Empire State Plaza in 2004, which is when the last payment needed to take place. Corning Tower today is named after him for his ingenious idea to come up with the money spending. And it's actually the tallest tower north of New York City all the way to Montreal. It currently houses the Wadsworth Health Center in the basement. It has the commissioner for OGS up at the very top, as well as other various agencies and offices that are necessary for the running of the state. At the very top, on the 43rd floor, is a public observation deck that is open Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. From the very top, you'll be able to see 4 states and 3 mountain ranges on a clear day, as well as the entire view of the city of Albany and a little bit of Troy right across the river from us. Definitely something worth checking out once the tour here concludes. So another sculpture that I'm going to be talking about is going to be coming up here on your left. It is this big black steel structure that you see. It is entitled The Snake is Out, and it was made by Tony Smith in 1969. Now, the piece itself is called The Snake is Out. It actually comes to us from a John McNulty short story that was entitled 3rd Avenue Medicine. The characters are referring to a vein popping out of a drunken man's forehead as the snake is out. I don't see anything. But that's a story that we had to tell about this. The piece itself is dwarfed when you look at the comparison of all the other larger structures that are around it, but you also notice it's made in stark contrast to the sharp edges of the Empire State Plaza. Although this is an angular piece, it twists and turns, it has form and motion to it, especially as you encircle it, which I hope you do on after this tour. It is definitely a piece worth getting a little bit of a closer look at. But going back to buildings, we of course have the egg, which we're just going to push up just a little bit more so you can get a better view of it. Now the egg itself, as I mentioned earlier on, was the last building that was constructed on the plaza in 1978. It actually required very early computers to assist us because the bowl shape is supported by about 5 floors of the stem that goes right underneath the ground. When Rockefeller designs the egg initially, he wants it to be a theater troupe. The idea would be is that there would be a troupe working for New York State that would write and put on plays for New Yorkers in Albany, throughout anywhere else around the state, as well as having a center for student theater to be located. Underneath are dance rooms, classrooms, practice rooms, black box theaters. Plenty of space down there that can be used to practice or host another play. The actual bowl of the egg itself was made using a continuous pour of concrete for 24 hours, so they constantly had to keep it rolling to fill the shape. The story behind why the egg looks the way it does is that Nelson Rockefeller and Harrison were sitting at their breakfast meeting and they were discussing what they wanted this theater complex to be. And Rockefeller will be sitting in front of a coffee cup and a half a grapefruit. He will take that half of grapefruit, put it right on top of the coffee cup and say, "Why don't we just do this?" Now, we don't know if that story's true or not. But what we do know is they discussed this over breakfast because the napkin of which this was initially designed on has coffee stains on it. It is still a current theater today. We have many shows that are coming here, including Kevin Bacon in November, apparently. So a lot of big people do come down here for this. On the right side of the bowl is the Kitty Carlisle Hart Theater, and that will house about 950 people. And on the left side is the Swire Theater, which houses about 450. Alright, so we're going to be stopping up here in just a few minutes because I think you probably want to get what is one of the most iconic views of the Empire State Plaza. On your left-hand side, you of course have the New York State Capitol building, which we talked about very briefly. You can just kind of see it in its totality here. You also have what is probably the most popular visiting site here in Albany, which is the I Heart New York sign. And on the right-hand side, you have the Cultural Education Center, once again, looking straight down the reflecting pools with the fountains pumping out all over the temple. But a sculpture that's worth talking about that did again recently come back to us on the right-hand side is George Rickey, 2 lines oblique. That is that big Y structure with the needles that are spinning around. Rickey was a kinetic sculptist. That means he liked having a lot of natural motion in his sculptures. Those 2 needles do spin on their own axes depending upon the weather and how much the wind is blowing. They do still hover about 8 feet above the ground even when they're pointed downward. So if you want to get a little bit closer look, you don't got to worry about getting close too hard for this one. Now the last memorial that I'm going to talk about, we're going to just about to pass it. It's going to be on your left on the corner here, where you will see the Firemen's Memorial. Now the Firemen's Memorial itself was dedicated in 1998, though of course 3 years later it would take on a much more deeper meaning here in New York State. On the wall is inscribed every single firefighter's name who has fallen in the line of service here in New York, with the 3 figures in the front being 2 firemen pulling a wounded comrade away from what is quite literally a wall of death. Another piece of art I want to talk about as we drive on by is that sculpture over there on the right hand side. Would anybody like to guess what it might be entitled? Blue and yellow. Ellsworth Kelly was very creative. What Ellsworth Kelly really attempted to do with his sculpture work is he wanted to remove the artist's touch. That means he doesn't want you to look at a piece of art and be able to see brush strokes. He doesn't want his personality. He wants you to experience the sculpture on your own terms. And that is why he designs this sculpture. It has nothing to do with Ukraine. Don't worry about that. But you might notice as we've been driving past it, you will see the same shape. You will see a rectangle, and yet the amount of color that you might see has been changing as we've been driving by it. It's a really cool thing to see as you drive on by. Now, while we have a moment, I know I haven't had a chance to ask yet, but has anybody had any questions about anything I've said or anything they've seen so far that I haven't yet talked about? I don't really expect anything. Never hurts to ask. Now, I'm going to talk about two sculptures left here on this tour. That is the black sculpture you see out there. That is considered the centerpiece of the plaza. That is Triangles and Arches by Alexander Calder. Now, Calder is really known for his mobiles. We have one that is hanging in the Empire and the museum building itself, right in the lobby there. This was made, again, to break up the monotony of all this beautiful white Alabama marble that's all over the plaza. It's a dark shape, it's jagged, it's pointy, and it actually is also made in part to align with the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception, which we passed by very briefly on this tour. So make sure you get a look at that from all sorts of angles. It's definitely something worth checking out. But talking about 9/11, there was a Calder statue that was in one of the towers as it collapsed. It actually flattened the sculpture, and that sculpture still is on display today. Now, the last sculpture that I'm going to talk about is the one that's right over here, and it doesn't really look like a sculpture, does it? This is entitled Labyrinth by Francois Scali. Now, Francois Scali, when he designs this sculpture, it is actually one of 11 pieces that was designed to be site-specific. That means this commission brought the artist and they said, we would like you to make a sculpture in this spot on the plaza, and this is one of such sculptures. Francois Scali used South African Iroko wood to design the approximately 39-foot tall tower, as well as the other 28 outer satellite structures, and it kind of looks like a playground or like just a seat, like a picnic area, doesn't it? And that's what he's trying to do. He wanted to design a place for New York State workers to really be able to relax, to get out of their offices and enjoy the beautiful sun on a nice summer day. He will actually be quoted as saying, a quiet space in the midst of stress created by work and pleasure, to open up an area of calm where man today seems to be in ever greater need. This is also one of the pieces that has recently come back to us in the last few years after generational treatment. Being made of wood, it takes a little bit more tender love and care to keep up to date. The last time it came back to us, it was actually blessed by a South African priestess to weather against the weather. So hopefully that holds out for us as the weather starts to become a little bit more hot here in the city. Now, as we do head right on back to where this tour started, so I can drop you all off and let you go about your day, I do want to tell you that this plaza is still very much used today for a bunch of different events. If you were to go on the Empire State Plaza website today, you will see the summer concert series that we do here. Every Wednesday, in addition to the farmers market, we have a concert series that's a free of charge concert. You will sit up right here on the museum steps and you'll be able to watch a show right here on stage. We usually have one main headliner, of which I can't remember off the top of my head this today, but last year the big headliner was Pat Benatar, which she came here and sang for us. It was a pretty cool concert. And they have vendors from Albany, they have alcoholic beverages, anything you could want from a concert, and you get to enjoy with all your fellow Albanians. But, as I mentioned, we are about to wrap up this tour, so I do want to thank you all for listening to me ramble about this beautiful plaza on such a hot sweltering day in the AC of a trolley here. I want to mention again, there is a Capitol tour that will be happening just after this tour. You probably should have just enough time to make it on the inside if you wish to take that and see what the New York State Capitol building looks like from the inside out. If not, you can always have a reason to come back. If you have any questions about the Empire State Plaza, I'd be glad to answer them on the way out if you do have any. Other than that, I do hope you enjoy the rest of this beautiful day here in Albany. Have a safe trip back home when you do finally decide to leave us.
want to go to the observation deck.
Yeah, you just go right up the escalators, and it's the third set of elevators.
Third set of elevators on that side.
Yeah, it's the third row.
Third row. Okay, thank you.
Observation level